Alright, learning event 3. Describe the construction operation power takeoffs. Military vehicles often the mount with special equipment, the driven with the vehicle engine, example the vehicle with the special equipment, the breaker with the dump truck, the tankers, and the trucks with winches. To obtain the power to drive the winch or the pump, the connection must be made with the vehicle powertrain. This is done with a gearbox called the power takeoff assembly. This is both of the large gearbox, such for the transmission auxiliary transmission transfer assembly. The power takeoff gets off of the power from the larger gearbox needed with the drive of the special equipment. Many model of the power takeoff assembly is also used with the military equipment. The size of the number of the speed will depend on the item of the be driven. The most simple power takeoff assembly is single speed with a single gear type of the assembly driving the item special equipment in one direction and one speed. Large power takeoff assemblies must have several forward and reverse speed to be special equipment. Construction operation. The construction operation presented with us here is based on the single forward reverse speed with the power takeoff over the driving a vehicle front winch. The assembly of the forward, reverse, and neutral shift position. The cast iron provided with the housing and mounting of all the shaft of the gears of the assembly with the large flange opening the side of the gearbox provided with the mounting of the surface. The mounting of the flange will match the mounting surface made with the side of the transmission transfer assembly. There is to mount with the power takeoff of the machine. Machine opening at the front of the rear of the cave for the provided mounting points of the shaft of the assembly contained with the drain plug for the lubricant. All shaft of the gear case mounted with the line with the vehicle power to train with the front of the rear of the vehicle output shaft of the may be extended with the front of the rear of the power takeoff case. Those driving in the front of the winch will extend from the front of the taper to the straight with the roller bearings, maybe even the mounting shaft at the end of the cave of the shaft. Is made with the slide forward and rearward with the drill passage within the cave with the mounting over the transmission. Shifter fork is both of the pin with the shifter shaft with the reset with the dent and is made with the inside with the shifter shaft with each with the shift position. The steel ball under the pressure is mounted with the passage at the right angle to the shifter shaft fits it into a recess. The power takeoff of the idle gear with its mount with it very nearly with the large flange on one side of the cave with the mounting case with the idle gear with the extend with the outside of the power takeoff of the power takeoff off its valve. Bolted to the transmission transfer of the idle gear extend with the larger gearbox of the mesh of the driving gear with the idle gear is double gear with the two side of the gear teeth. One side of the gear case is designed with the mesh with the driven gear with the transmission. Other will mesh with the reverse gear with the reverse gear is and double the gear with the mount with the one side of the constant mesh for the idle gear with the straight roller with the bearings as you with the mount. The reverse gear and to the shaft of the sliding of the gear was made to mesh with the both of the idler reverse gear with the mount with this line with the output shaft of the tapered roller bearings at each end of the mounting the support with the output shaft of the power takeoff case. The sliding gear can slide with the front with the rear of the output shaft of the power of the output shaft extend with the outside of the case. The oil seal in the retainer prevents the lubricating oil from the output shaft passing through the case. Propeller shaft of the drive yoke mounted with the end of the output shaft of each outside of the power takeoff case of the secure with the metal key with which fits in the slot of the shaft. Power takeoff is mounted on the side of the transmission. Shifter lever extended into the cab of the vehicle. The slot is cut into the cab floor. Is allowed the lever to move back and forth. The latch holding the latch in the neutral position. Power takeoff is not even mounted on the cab floor. Is not in use. The mount is mounted to the cab floor. In neutral position, the power takeoff idler gear with the constant mesh of the gear of the transmission counter shaft. Power takeoff reverse idler with the constant mesh of the idle gear with the sliding of the gear is in neutral position between the idler and inverter. The vehicle clutch is engaged with the operator of the transmission counter shaft with the drive of the idler with the reverse gear of the power takeoff. Since the sliding gear is not in mesh with any of the driven gears of the no power reach of the output shaft. Now let's see what happens when the power takeoff is used operating a winch and put in operation. To wind the cable of the vehicle, the operator will relieve the disengage with the clutch, remove the power takeoff the control lever, the top of the shift lever that moves forward with the lever put its up, moving it mounting pin of the lower end of the lever moves rearward. The shifter shaft is connected with the lower end of the control lever that moves the rear, but at the same time with the shifter fork mounted with the shifter shaft is moving sliding gear inside of the power takeout to the rear, and the sliding gear with the move along the spline with the output shaft with the smash for the idle gear with the slide, and a shaft with complete with the slide steel ball under the spring pressure moves into the reset of the shifter shaft to hold the gears in position. The engine clutch is engaged with the transmission counter shaft with the power takeoff, the idler gear with the sliding gear, and the output shaft with the output shaft, the drive of the winch with the propeller shaft with the proper direction, cover the winch to wind the cable. Drive of the winch so that the cable will unwind with the drum of the vehicle operates to relieve the engine clutch and then move the power takeoff control lever to the rear. Forces the shifter shaft, fork, and sliding gear to move forward, then swivel the gear mesh with the reverse gear with the steel ball under spring pressure holds the shifter shaft in selected position. As the engine clutch is engaged, the transmission counter shaft, the drive of the idler reverse, and sliding gears. Since the sliding gear is splined, the output shaft of the shaft is driven in the same direction of the gear. The wind propeller shaft is driven by the output shaft of the proper direction, unwinding the cable for the winch drum. Your power takeoff assembly is mounted on the low side of the large gearbox below the level of the lubricating oil of the construction of the transmission. Lubricating is free of flow is to flow freely in and out of the power takeout. With the proper lubrication, strip of the power takeout parts of the operation below the level of the gear oil. Only the power takeout assembly is mounted above the level of the lubricant oil is splashed assembly with the transmission counter shaft. The heavy-duty type of the power takeout is designed with a mount with a 206 hole with a 6-stud power takeoff opening is designed to mount the left and right side of the driving mechanism. Shifter and shaft extend through each end of the cage. The shifting control linkage may be attached for either end. The output shaft is extended to the front of the cage. Provided with the woodproof key and mounting of the winch of the propeller shaft, the companion flange. Boots are installed over the ends of the shifter shaft to protect the surface of the shaft of the power takeoff input gear is clustered composed of the helical gear, which constantly in a mesh with the helical gear, the transmission reverse idler gear, the driven gear with the spur tooth construction. Your power takeout with 2-4 speed with neutral 1 reverse speed with the shifting mechanism provides selections as desired speed for direction, rotation, output shaft with the neutral position, shifting mechanism, disengage output shaft with gears for the driving gear. Your input gear, the helical input gear with the constant mesh of the helical gear with the transmission reverse idler gear. Therefore, the constant rotation of the engine is engaged. Input gear is is installed in the non-rotating input gear shaft with the mounting on the input gear roller bearings. The shaft that's pressed into the housings gear with the cotter pin, the brush washer, is located at the edge end of the input gear. Helical tooth portion of the input gear is constant mesh with the reverse gear with the install of the reverse gear shaft. Screw with the reverse gear pin, the reverse gear shaft rotate into support rollers. Bearings. Output shaft. The output shaft supported and the housing with the 2-ball bearing of the 2 gears are installed with the output shaft. One is the output shaft sliding gear, which is moved forward and backward on the shaft. Those shafts are forks. On the other output shaft, the high-speed gear with the free of the output shaft is in constant mesh with the input gear. Sliding gear is supplying with the output shaft of the main mesh for the reverse gear. Spur tooth and one on the input gear with low-speed operation or may act as a clutch gear with the couple the output shaft of the high-speed gear to the output shaft. Your shifter fork. Shifter fork is attached to the shifter shaft by means of a cap screw. The fork engages the circumferential groove of the sliding gear. Alright, learning event number 4. Discover the maintenance of manual transmission and power. These lessons will acquaint the will with the procedure for the brief valve with the inspection, testing, adjusting, repairing of the transmission power takeoffs. Remember, however, that you should never be satisfied with the finding of the correction and satisfied just finding and correcting the problem. You should always try to find what caused the problem. Where you can find the transmission broken gear teeth. Do not be satisfied to just replace the transmission. Try to find out the cause of the gear teeth to break. Whenever you find such components of the transmission power take an unserviceable condition, talk with the driver. The driver must be able to explain exactly how the failure could occur, give the clues of the cause of the failure. If you can finally find the cause, you probably have to do the job over because of some of the trouble to most likely develop the replacement in transmission and power takeoff. Inspecting the transmission, leak of the oil, gasket are probably most common causes of the transmission power takeoff problems, and such problems are not corrected in time. The gear shaft and bearings can be ruined. There are many possible causes of the oil single and gasket failures to always look for, and whenever you find such a failure. Causing a leak lubricants. Now let's discover the region where the lubricant is likely to leak at one of several of those locations. First of all, the transmission. Almost all of the other gear cases will usually start leaking at a level that is too high. To shift the oil used in the gear case, because soap and soda is usually added to the oil. As the gears operate with the oil is splashed all over the inside of the gear case, because the soap and partially because of the splashing with the heat, the oil starts to form with the film with the air bubbles. Thus the oil expands with the take up of the room. The action creates the excessive pressure inside of the gear case. If the oil level is too high, they start with the pressure created inside of the transmission. May be more like the seals and gaskets can resist. The oil will start leaking out. Leaking can occur one of several locations. The transmission oil level should only be checked after the vehicle has been parked in several hours over the night, and during this time the bubbles and foams will cool and settle as the liquid in the bottom of the transmission cable. The transmission coil will remove the fill plug. The oil level should be just below the bottom of the fill plug. Oil level is too high to allow the excess oil to run over the fill plug hole. Even if the oil level is correct with a possible foaming action, the oil will cover the pressure for the inside of the transmission to become too high to permit the excessive pressure to escape. A vent valve is used. The valve contained with the seat with a spring-loaded bulb with a dust cup over the valve assembly to the check valve with the vent valve with the first ensure that it around with the air with the free of the dust and dirt. Try turning the dust caps on your fingers. It should turn freely in either direction. It does not turn freely. Replace it. Gaskets, oil, and seals will always leak if the bolts secure to the plate of the cover of the retainer is loose. All of the bolts should be tightened uniformly with a torque wrench. These bolts and input shafts, retainers, the gear shaft housing cover the retainer seals are 5/16 of an inch. Bolts should be tightened to torque wrenching at a 10 to 14 pound feet. Do not over tighten the bolts. Secure with the transfer cable. The transmission 3/8 of an inch should be tightened to 20 to 25 pounds of feet. Tighten with the bolt to fail to see stop a leak with at this point. The using of the repair should be notify the motor office of the motor sergeant because replacing the transmission transfer case gasket is the job of the maintenance support unit. Leaking around with the threads and filler plugs, drain plugs, any of the bolts can usually be stopped by coating of the threads of the plugs and bolts or lead-based paint. Loose gear shifter retainer will also use the lubricating to escape. If the leaks cannot be stopped, tightening the bolts and plugs by coating the threads, notify the maintenance support unit. Alright, all the seals need to be lubricated, otherwise will be ruined. Therefore, a little seepage around any of the seals. Normal seals is considered leaking unless enough oil is escaping the seal to drip onto the ground, causing a small puddle. Leaking seal of the power plant is on the vehicle. You can inspect all the seals except for the input shaft, the retainer seal. If the seal is leaking, oil will drip through the plug hole in the bottom of the pan under the flywheel housing of the plug is removed. The oil dripping out of the flywheel housing drain plug. Examine the oil closely. If the most of the engine leaking of the engine crankshaft, the rear oil seal. The engine is oil much thinner than oil that has less viscosity than transmission oil. You should be able to tell which seal is leaking. Oil leak either the engine transmission input shaft seriously because the oil can ruin the clutch. Oil seat clutch is discussed. This will almost slip or grab. Test transmission malfunction. Addition with the leakage problem or the problem that can develop with the transmission even in a 1/4 ton truck. We classify these mechanical problems. The best way to locate the mechanical problem of the transmission rotor of the test vehicle before the rotor test. However, the check with the missing loosening bolt. Be sure for the oil in the proper level of the transmission cable. Check with the brake of the magnet of the proper mounting with the correct adjustment. Check with all the moisture seals and boots. Check with the action and the gear shifters. Levers. Transmission often blamed for the problems elsewhere everywhere else. For example, the engine running of the vehicle, standing on the disengage with the clutch and move of the gear shaft lever into first or reverse. You should be able to shift into either of the gear position without any gear clashing. Without the vehicle to move, then gear clash with the vehicle. Attempt to move with the clutch disengage with the trouble issue. Clutch with the transmission. Check the clutch and pedal for you with the travel adjusting necessary. The clutch must be correctly adjusted before transmission can operate. Clutch must fully disengage every time the clutch pedal is pushed all the way down and fully engage every time the pedal is released. Alright, when the transmission is neutral, the engine running of the clutch and gave all the constant mesh of the gear for the transmission will be turning this, therefore little vary gears bearing noises. If the transmission gear with the neutral with the clutch engage, disengage the clutch. If the noise is now heard, the trouble is with the clutch and the transmission. Usually the clutch will leave the bearing and the clutch pilot bearing is faulty, and if the noise is heard only when the clutch is disengaged. Sometimes the noise in other parts of the powertrain, such as U-joints, propeller shaft, the differential sounds are there in the transmission. Misalignment with the powertrain components that usually produce the noise that may sound like it's coming from the transmission. So be sure to check out the mounting bolts of the engine transmission differential before the road testing of the vehicle. I'll check with the propeller and shaft of the U-joints evidence of the wearing of loose bends and shifted suspension system components of misalignment with the powertrain components that can produce noise that may sound defective transmission. Noise of the originating of the transmission is difficult to describe. The noise of the sound like a howl may sound like a squeal to some. When else, often the terms often describe the gear of the bearing noise may include such a hum, knock, grinding, whine, or thump. If the tubes are broken off the one gear with a distinct thumping noise will be heard once during the complete revolution of the gear. A thump will be pronounced if the torque is being delivered through the gear. Gears with worn, rough teeth will usually produce the gear grinding noise, especially when the torque is being transmitted through them. Bearing noise is usually described as a howl, whine, or squeal. Actually, the type of this noise is made if the defective bearing will be vary. Depending on the type of the defective loading of the bearing and supporting in the event of the load noise coming from the inside of the transmission mean trouble. Alright, some whining and grinding noise can be expected, especially when the vehicle is being driven in first of the reverse gear. The first and reverse shaft sliding gear together, the mating the counter shaft of the gear and reverse out of the gear are spur gears. Spur gears are always noisy. But as you recall the preceding lesson, they are frequently either cheaper and do not produce thrust. Second, third, and fourth speeds range of the transmission should be much quieter than the first and the first reverse. If after the road test you think the transmission is to be noisy, to be sure of the report of the motor sergeant and be sure to describe the conditions under these noises occur. Another common mechanical problem with the transmission of the type of the slipping the jump out of the gear of the actual transmission is much likely to slip the jump out of the first rather than out of the second, third, and fourth speed gear. The second, third, and fourth speed gear are helical gears, which are produce thrust. Most likely cause the transmission slipping out of the gear with worn dent balls and spring with the shaft of the cover. The spring-loaded balls hold the shifter shaft in position, and when the spring does not have enough tension, the balls are worn. Transmission will almost certainly slip or jump out of gear. Synchronizing damage will also cause the transmission jump out of gear. Slipping out of gear is most likely to occur when the driver suddenly takes off his or her foot off of the accelerator pedal one, descending a steep hill. Thrust produced the helical gears will tend to move the all-rotating gears and shaft of the rear transmission as long as the torque provided by the engine is being delivered to the rear wheels of the transmission. However, the driver takes his or her foot off the accelerator by pedal, the situation is changed. The rear wheels will now drive through the engine through the transmission. The first direction of the torque being delivered through the transmission gear of the thrust now toward the front of the transmission. If the thrust is not controlled by the thrust washer, the bearing retainers is likely to force the shifter shaft to move in spite of the spring-loaded balls, and it holds it in. When this happens, the transmission slips out of gear. Occasionally, the transmission slips out of gear because the driver does not fully engage the gear when moving the lever. However, the transmission slips out of gear fairly enough that it will be replaced. Alright, power takeoff and maintenance, inspection, and testing. Specific procedures must be followed with the inspection, with the testing and servicing of the power takeoff and related parts. Military vehicle, commonly used with the driver, the wrench of the wrenches are mounted on front of the vehicle, although some of the vehicles, such as records, and also have wrenches mounted in the rear. In the case records and support power takeoffs and using the drive each winch. Procedure for the inspection, testing, power takeoff are similar to follow with the inspection, testing, transmission. Input gear power takeoff is used with the drive of the front winch of the 2.5-ton front and the constant mesh with the reverse idler gear transmission countershaft. Power takeoff input gear driving gear are turning anytime the engine is running and the clutch is engaged. They are also turning if the vehicle is moving. Therefore, worn, broken power takeoff input driving gear teeth and defective bearings can cause noises that sound like they're coming from the transmission. Leaking power takeoff gasket seals will also cause the loss of the transmission oil because the power tank is bolted to the transmission and lubricated by oil from it. Most likely place for the oil leak for the power takeoff and mounting flange of the gasket between the power takeoff and the transmission power takeoff. Cover the cap screw for the cover of the gap for the ball retainer. Output reverse shaft bearing cap. Output shaft bearing cap gasket seals, bellow types, boots, and other seals both in and shifter shafts. Any leaks from around mounting flange bearing caps and cover gaskets corrected by the tightening mounting screws and nuts. Proper torque tightening screws and nuts fail to stop the leaks. Notify your support maintenance repeal and replace the seals as all the job of support maintenance unit. All your practice exercises and answers. Lesson 4: Fundamental automatic transmissions.